A huge challenge has arisen in front of India. The United States has imposed sanctions on Russia's two major oil-producing companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. This is a concerning development for India's energy security. This is because India purchases a large amount of discounted oil from Russia, and around 60% of India's incoming Russian crude supply comes from Rosneft and Lukoil. Now, the United States has imposed sanctions on these very two companies. Due to these sanctions, India may face oil supply disruptions. Why has America imposed sanctions on these companies? It is because the American President Donald Trump wants to put pressure on Russia to end the Ukraine war. For this purpose, he is targeting Russia's energy sector. Imposing sanctions on Russia's two largest oil-producing companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, is part of that strategy. What will happen because of these sanctions? American companies and financial institutions will no longer be able to engage with these Russian companies. Even if a third party deals with these Russian companies, it will face secondary sanctions. Overall, this is a direct blow to the international operations of Rosneft and Lukoil. Now, India, which buys oil from these companies, is facing a major dilemma. On one hand, there is the benefit of getting affordable energy from Russia. On the other hand, there is the risk of America's secondary sanctions. If India continues to maintain its time-tested strategic partnership with Russia, if it keeps purchasing oil from Russia without caring about the US sanctions, then, in that case, India will face secondary sanctions. Indian banks, refineries, insurance companies, and any entity dealing with Rosneft or Lukoil will have to bear the weight of these secondary sanctions. They will be isolated from the global financial system. To continue purchasing discounted oil from Russia, India will have to face all these consequences. On the other hand, if India bows down to American pressure and stops buying oil from Russia, then India will have to switch to expensive alternatives. This will increase fuel costs. Its ripple effects will be seen across the Indian economy. Inflation will rise, and India's energy security will be threatened. India will suffer economic losses. Moreover, bowing down to American hegemony will hurt India's image. Once India compromises its decision-making autonomy, it will invite further encroachments. Then, questions will also be raised about India's non-aligned foreign policy, and BRICS solidarity will be affected. India is now facing a serious question. Should it compromise its autonomy just to avoid short-term political and economic pain? Undoubtedly, secondary sanctions will create difficulties, but should India compromise its decision-making sovereignty because of them? US President Donald Trump and his team continuously pressure India not to buy oil from Russia. They keep telling India to not fund Russia's war, but they remain silent in front of China. Despite the fact that China is currently the largest buyer of Russian oil, Trump and Xi Jinping have already met, discussed global issues, and even announced a rare earths deal, but Trump did not dare to even mention China's Russian oil imports. However, when it comes to India, Trump and his entire team immediately start blabbering. They impose tariffs and make unnecessary statements. All this is done selectively against India, while they act completely soft in front of China. America's situation is such that one president comes and requests India to buy oil from Russia so that the global energy market remains stable and fuel prices do not rise sharply. Then, another president comes and asks to immediately stop buying oil from Russia, accusing India of funding Russia's war. I mean, there is no policy continuity in the US. So, in order to partner with such an unreliable and hypocritical country like the United States, should India allow cracks to appear in its time-tested friendship with Russia? Or should India boldly resist American pressure, endure some short-term pain, and continue to champion the cause of a fair global order instead of the hegemony of a single nation? This is the dilemma India faces, whether to ignore America's threats and continue importing oil from Russia, or to comply with America's demands. Both options have their own challenges. Rosneft holds a 49% stake in India's Naira Energy. By purchasing discounted oil from Russia, India has saved billions of dollars in foreign exchange and met its energy needs. So now, after the 30-day grace period ends and American sanctions take effect, should India give up all these benefits? Or should India demand a fair and equitable deal during trade talks with the US? Should India not resist these American attempts to force a deal by putting a gun to its head? See, Russian companies are being forced to sell their assets in haste. They are about to face the impact of sanctions. The US has frozen the American assets of Rosneft and Lukoil. To navigate through this situation, Lukoil has decided to sell its international assets. The grace period will end on November 21, and before that, the company wants to sell its overseas assets. Negotiations with potential buyers are underway. Trump's sanctions will prevent American companies from engaging with Lukoil and will tighten international scrutiny on the company. Due to secondary sanctions, foreign banks, insurance companies, and shipping firms will avoid engaging with Lukoil. In this way, US sanctions will disrupt Lukoil's international dealings. For instance, Lukoil has refineries in countries like the Netherlands, Bulgaria, and Romania. It also has a network of gas stations across several European countries. All of these will be affected by the sanctions. Therefore, Lukoil now wants to reduce its international footprint and focus on Russia-centric operations. Russian companies are being forced to make such hurried decisions. This is because, under his American First agenda, Donald Trump wants to use sanctions to boost US energy exports. He also wants to curtail the challenge to the petrodollar. So the sanctions the United States is imposing on Russian companies are not only meant to punish Russia, the game is much bigger than that. The United States wants to maintain its grip on oil, currency, and power. But many countries are understanding this game and are trying to counter it. To bypass Western sanctions, Russia is decoupling from Western systems. It is promoting rupee-ruble and yuan-ruble settlements instead of the dollar. Since the United States is weaponizing sanctions, Russia is switching to alternative payment mechanisms to protect its economy. It is decoupling its energy trade from the Western financial system. To insulate itself from dollar dominance, India should also increase rupee-ruble trade. To navigate global uncertainties, India should diversify its energy sources. Dependence on oil should be reduced by increasing investments in renewable energy. And the most critical point right now, without alienating Russia, India should try to obtain concessions and exemptions from the United States through trade talks. India should not change its energy policy under anyone's pressure. It should not give up its autonomy to decide its energy policy. Western countries must not determine when, from whom, and how much oil we purchase. Our trade choices will be based on our domestic needs, not on anyone's pressure. We must not bow before the coercion of any country. Unfair measures should be legally challenged, and, as far as possible, we should strategically negotiate while clearly conveying our position and build domestic resilience to protect against the effects of such external challenges. India has thoughtfully adopted a neutral policy in the Russia-Ukraine war. Western countries have from the start pressured India to pick a side. India has so far resisted this pressure and has maintained its neutral stance. This is India's sovereign decision and it should not be changed by unilateral decisions of the United States or any other country. While keeping our energy security in mind, we will continue buying discounted oil from Russia for as long as we wish. Western countries are even ready to go against WTO rules for political gains. Lawful trade is taking place and they want to disrupt it through coercion for their own benefit. Forcibly conditioning the market to suit themselves is a violation of WTO norms. But we all know how sincerely Western countries follow the rules. To meet their strategic goals, Western countries will not hesitate to adopt any form of pressure tactic. India should be prepared for this and should give a pragmatic response. India should file a complaint in the WTO against the unfair trade practices of the United States and the European Union. Just as India obtained a waiver in 2018 when sanctions were imposed on Iran, India should now try to obtain a waiver when sanctions have been imposed on Russia. India should negotiate with the United States, emphasize mutual interests in countering China, and seek concessions. At the same time, to build resilience, India should work with BRICS countries to accelerate de-dollarization. Rupee-based deals should be promoted. In this changing world order, while keeping its interests in mind, India should firmly defend its sovereign choices and rapidly build self-reliance. In a multipolar world, the United States is testing the limits of its unilateral power. Its actions are putting India in a dilemma. Through pragmatic decision making, India can navigate this geo-economic fallout.